It's a great pleasure to welcome you all and to welcome Ben van Berkel tonight here at Staedelschule with his lecture Trained Judgment, which I think, well, I can only speculate. I have never heard your lecture, but I can only speculate on its topic, and I think it hopefully addresses maybe one of the crucial problems actually of designing, which is related to this moment of judgment of having different options, scenarios, parameters, and I hope to learn a lot from you about this particular problem of judgment and in relation to the question of training or trained judgment. Ben, just to give it's probably totally unnecessary, but there are some new students, maybe I should give a very brief introduction. Ben, together with his partner, Caroline Bos, are running UN Studio, which I think is today one of the most prolific architecture firms on a global scale. Most of you certainly know some of his buildings, like, for instance, the Mercedes-Benz Museum in Stuttgart, or this Galleria department store, I think is the name, in Seoul, or even some very important small houses, like the Möbius House, which is a very rather early work, or a music theater in Graz, and most recently quite a large project in Manhattan, an apartment tower, and many others. The list would be endless. So that today also Ben has more than one office, more than his Amsterdam office. There's an office in Shanghai, which I think is also an indication how maybe the scale also changes of your operations. Ben has studied at the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam and at the AA in London, where he also started teaching then, shortly after your studies. And his academic career then continued in the US very much at Columbia, at Princeton and Harvard University. And we are very happy to have him here at the Staedelschule since now 10 years. We'll also have, I think, a kind of party, let's call it like that. It doesn't sound so formal, in November, which is about the architecture class in 10 years. But first of all, we are very happy to have you here for this lecture. Please welcome Ben van Berkel.
Thank you. Maybe someone can turn off the light. Oh. So thank you, Nicholas. I quite liked it how you asked me only a few weeks ago to give a talk, because normally I have to be booked a few months in advance, but you were on the spot because I was working on a lecture. And liked it so much that it is related to some of the last interest in that what we have developed in not only in the studio but also maybe you and I here also at the Staedelschule. So it came all nicely together. But what I like to do today is to go into this notion of what was mentioned, how do we judge as architects? What is it that we make in the process of design, and how do we select? What is it that we connect to what we call what is objective, and where does the subject come in? And I've been always fascinated in this latest aspect of the profession, whereby we could say that we've expanded it endlessly. We've expanded it on the one side, whereby functionality is not anymore the word we use, but functionality is changed into a topic around efficiencies. And we have so many specialists where we work with, so many regulations, so many different types of complex, I would like to say, almost sciences. And how do we deal with this idea of the engineering of these sciences today in architecture? There's one side of the profession, and the other side is, and that's why you should be all happy to be here, is call it the aesthetic side of architecture, where luckily enough we don't have to refer back to ourselves anymore alone, our own discipline. We now, as we know from a long time, we're not only the artist in the field alone when it comes down to a long history of the interpretation of the architect, as we know, already from the 16th, 15th century onwards. It was believed that that architects could be both. They could be the engineer and the artist in the same time. Now we can refer to being somewhere also maybe a fashion designer, or flirt with ideas around product design or other fields in the sector, whereby the aesthetic can be put in many complex brackets. And if there is an aesthetic theory today, then it would be interesting to start up what it is, what makes our work, call it fascinating instead of aesthetic. So maybe I'd like to talk about the scientific self. So what is it? So talking about the scientific, I mean, one deals with the objective side of the profession, and the self maybe related to who we are as architects. And for that reason, I picked up that picture I often refer to as what is connected to a personal experience I've always been fascinated by. And that's the pavilion we did for a museum in Cincinnati, where the room or this installation is called a holiday home. And the holiday home dealt with this idea that I, for a long time, even although I have a little secret place where I go to sometimes, but I've always been critical of the phenomenon of the holiday home, in the sense of, why do you have developed in our culture these forms of escapism? Why do we escape? Why do we like to escape? Why is it so that we have this form of another home, what is a better place than our own home? So my theory was always, is it not possible to bring the holiday home home? Could you not bring it home, that holiday home? And in this home where then, with maybe this particular kind of color, the color, I always call this color a no-color color, because it picks up so many other colors, like purple, pink. This place is changing constantly with the light around this room, and the openings are articulating maybe the different places where one is maybe connected to when it comes down to the holiday home. Maybe it's connecting also a bit to a personal experience, like I said, that whenever I travel, I like to be in the same place. And that's not related to that these other places are my holiday homes, but specifically when I'm in a hotel, I prefer to be always in the same room, because that gives me the feeling of home. And maybe that deals with these different viewpoints in this holiday home. But you can, so in that sense, you can see this as an installation, or you can see this as maybe somewhere going beyond the phenomenon of architecture alone. It is also so that you can double read it. You can see double images in this space. It's also quite critically selected through the way how certain geometrical angles in its repetition are coming back as a rhythm, whereby maybe when you come into the pavilion, you might think it's highly complex. But after a while you discover, like maybe this person just visiting the exhibition, she's not a model, just enjoy to relax a bit. So a form of calmness is to be found in a complex condition, is my argument also here. So this idea of the double reading and that it creates a communicative quality is related maybe to this idea of the science self, of the interpretative eye. And if we think about this notion of how we develop our work, of how the eye and maybe the mind and the way how we handle the work and the techniques, then this trial relationship between design and thinking and learning is what architects like to deal with. That is, I mean, the quality of our profession. And to transport ideas, like this idea of the holiday home was then brought to an idea of the foyer space in a vertical foyer, I would like to say, in a theater in Lelystad in Holland, where the idea was that you constantly, through the vistas, like the openings we saw maybe in the holiday home, you can see the public coming into the building, but from different diagonal levels in the vertical space of this foyer, because there are several theaters or parts of the theater introduced on top of each other and next to each other. So this is what I call the serial effect of the way how we transport knowledge, and that we can come into an oceanic feeling of there where we make our ideas unreal, I would like to say sometimes. You know, sometimes you're going in so many ideas of your design that you might turn into a field of an experience whereby you don't know sometimes how to select. But it's important that you know where you stop in the highly complex expansion of this field of where our profession is dealing with, and that's the most beautiful aspect of I would say design or proliferating architecture, especially in the serial aspect of the way how you can learn over, for instance, designing pavilions or installations as we do it. We have done so many, maybe around close to 11 pavilions designed over the last 5-6 years. But they became for us prototypes for design, prototypes for thinking spatially about how one can transport these ideas. And for that reason, in this highly complex field, it is important to be critical, to be so dealing with all these levels of information that you know where to stop. And the most fascinating is that when it comes down to a particular kind of expression of a spatial articulation, what is for me the most fascinating is there where the project works. So if someone says to me, yeah, but how do you which moment do you select? I don't know, I often say. Don't ask me. Maybe there where it works, where the project really works, on all these levels, I may be described in the holiday home effect. So the holiday home effect becomes a kind of model, not only a conceptual model, but it becomes a kind of material conceptual instrument for design. So that's how I train myself. This is an exhibition, actually, of the pavilions presented in University of Harvard, where I was last term, over the different walls, as you can see, ceilings and floors, I introduced these different projected aspects of the images of the pavilions in order to step into the pavilion without being really in it. You're in the image of it, or you are in the distorted image of it. And we had today a discussion about that effect, what is called the parallax view. But this is exactly what I mean about that, what a parallax view can do. That you somewhere have, like in the Moray effect, that you have 2 layers of experiences, or maybe sometimes even 3, whereby you think that you are in the image, but you're not really. Or that there are two, like in the classical example of the parallax interpretation, it's so that two colonnades, if you would pass them in a classical building, that the two different types of columns would start to generate different types of spatial images. Is that what you can also do in a more three-dimensional and even four-dimensional quality of the way how you experience matter and how motion turns into matter. And this exhibition was for that reason called Motion Matters. So, and it's very weird when you come into the exhibition because you sometimes don't know if it is the person in the picture is the real or not person, etc. But this double reading of architecture, the spatial experiences of the way how we can design or integral qualities of that what we are after in architecture is, like I said, has been always fascinating me, and the way how we can bring it to an objective aspect of architecture, where it becomes construction and deals with the environment or with the quality of that what is simply asked in a brief where you have to deal with, then I always turn these briefs around. I try very hard. And it's not always easy, but like for instance in this example, being simply in a department store, I very hard try to find methods to make this building more than only that what it is. In my interpretation, it was always seen to be as a lamp in the city. What constantly changes its effects with different colors within the organization of the city and its surroundings. Or that it is promoting or celebrating the idea of a public life. What is in Korea and especially in Asia far more interesting to deal with when it comes down to a place where people gather. People gather in these departments, so they just socialize, they go eye shopping, they don't want to shop alone, they want to see this as a public space. So for that reason I wanted to make sure that there was no branding on the facade going on apart from a little panel explaining what kind of events there are in the building sometimes. And for the rest it could be seen in my eye almost as an artwork. Or like in this villa, where maybe there's a little bit of play of the fascination of that what the client loved so much in his own collection of art, and that was often the phenomenon of gold. He loved gold. I mean, it was a Russian client, so it's, I mean, understandable. But you can see it going a bit around the fireplace and then this gold glass. But it was, of course, a kind of ironical wink to play with that a bit and to bring it back into that what fascinated me always so much in this particular type of glass I could really very difficultly find, but it was often used in Spain. It is a glass what is having, I forget now the material, but it's having a particular kind of material in it whereby it reflects beautifully its surroundings. So for that reason it creates these images, and I would like to call it after images. So this phenomenon of that the image in itself and the way how you can create an effect with an image is not a key aspect of how you can design spaces today. But what my belief is that it is interesting to think of what stays in the mind when you leave the image. So that it creates a series of thoughts when you've left the space, so where you'd like to come back to. And similarly with the way then how it is translated into a geometrical effect, like the house is starting with a kind of box-like organization where at the end of the house you have the living room and the kitchen, but if you come in this public central moment, then there is where you can meet. That's where a semi-public moment appears within the house, where the kids and the parents, they can cross over their communication. So it's the first moment that you see each other, and also the first moment that you see the landscape when you move towards the living room in this house. So these these aspects of the way how we engineer and construct buildings are, in my opinion, not the most important. I'm trying to say architecture, in a way, is not so important. I'm saying, in a way, architecture is only background. I'm saying, in a way, how is it possible that between the image of architecture and the spatial effects, we can create a particular construct? Not a construct of that what we engineer, like design, but the construct between that what you introduce between who's in it and for who you designed it for. And I think now, and half a year or a year ago, I talked similarly here, also in this place, about the twist. How can we twist this notion of a particular kind of quality of the way how we name a project, or what kind of program we give it. You know, we might think that it isn't like this was meant to be a showroom, and a client really wanted to go for a showroom with the cars in it, but we always argued, nah, who cares about the showroom? Because I mean, a showroom is a bit kind of commercial, not, and would it not be interesting to think about a museum? And then concrete was not allowed at all, because I mean concrete was not at all connected to Mercedes. But when I, with a group of directors, went to see the Museum of Modern Art and showed them the hanging helicopter in the entrance area, then they believed, yeah, no, it's true, that a helicopter, if that is a piece of art, why could be a car not a piece of art? So they needed a series of arguments, or the concrete here related to the way how in Stuttgart we know that all these bridges and tunnels and roads have this fantastic concrete infrastructural quality. So to use that as a background against the car, that took a while, but was accepted. And here again, it's not again to bring that twist into the programmatic level alone, but also to bring it almost in a physical, organizational level into the building, whereby the twist here becomes a construct for the way how it can then develop all these vistas in different complex layers when you are in the building. And you know, it's a double helix, whereby you almost don't know sometimes where you enter and go through the building and where it's walking on which level, which related to the way how you find your moment in the, or your way in the building. Similarly, in this latest project, this is even put in a far more extreme effect. If you enter the building, this kind of double, I would say, 3-4 double parallax view of the way sometimes how the scale is constantly disappearing out of your fingers, I would like to almost say, is that when you enter it, you think that it is a 4-story high building, and then later you discover, oh gosh, maybe it might be more than 20 stories or even higher, and then you discover it's only 11 stories high. So this constant play between different scales was introduced in this space, but is double in its reading, and double in its reading of its scale, but also double in its reading of the way how it can be seen as what kind of space is it exactly. Like, is it a kind of chandelier-like space? Is it a museum, or yeah, whatever program you might like to add towards it. But I've always showed this picture, and it's one of my favorite pictures. It's the smoke detectors system in the Mercedes-Benz building, and here the smoke can be taken out of the building in almost, like I've always said, close between 5 to 10 minutes in the building when there is fire. So we had to prove it. The regulations of Stuttgart said that it was not possible to allow this. But with many engineers, through the proof, it was then accepted within the city to introduce this highly ingenious effect of the way how you can suck out of the smoke very quickly into a building. So this was artificially introduced into the project, and then attested in this case several times. But what it did was the most interesting. It gave us the allowance of not to compartmentalize the project. So we could reduce with that almost close to 15% of the materials in the project, and close to 10 to 15% also of the cost of this project. And When I talk about this phenomenon of the engineering of design, then I'm interested also where can we as architects make affordability work. I mean, it sounds maybe a bit complex topic, but you have to remember, otherwise I come back to it. But affordability is one of the most fascinating topics we have to deal with today. I don't like it because sometimes you have a client who comes, or you know, even an individual person coming to you who wants to have a house or a loft somewhere in New York, and might say, yeah, you know, I mean, particularly in this time, and then we talk about already 4 or 5 years that this difficult or this different economical time is an aspect we have to deal with. How could we make things more affordable? And then I've learned, then it is highly fascinating to think of how we can make space for ourselves. So where can we reduce down opportunities in order to win more qualities we can introduce in a project where otherwise we couldn't do it. So here, the building could be made and totally open with a lot of visual connections and relationships within the building. So it didn't deal so much anymore, luckily enough, with this compartmentalization in the building. So this invisible aspect of architecture, this invisible aspect of the way how we produce our architecture is something that I lately go more deeper into. And you can maybe here see that this is all about the building, what we lately designed. This is about the way how we program or architecture today. It's not anymore so that we need drawings. Of course, in the end, we need drawings in order to build a project, but this is the latest plan, what we produce in our profession. And not everyone is dealing with it, but I believe in it strongly that today this phenomenon of the way how we program is giving us a far more amount of possibilities to select and to judge and to refine and to be quick. To be quick not in a commercial sense, but more in the way how we can understand our work very fast. Even in the first weeks where you have not fully everyone on board even on the project, but you can communicate this very quickly to all your engineers and specialists where you work with, and they can then see with you together if this 3D model of the project is going to work. So if design is subjective, like I said already before, and construction is objective, then architecture, in my opinion, is this notion of trained judgment. So if we think about the relationship between that, what I said about what we can learn of what we produce with the eye, and painters have been doing that for many years, or many centuries, I should say, of how we can observe. And this notion of observing and this aspect of the way how we have developed through maybe then later on the lens, and then maybe further later on the camera, and maybe then later on the computer. Through that we have developed a way of observing, but it's totally different than, let's say, how we observed a few centuries ago. But that doesn't mean that this idea of observing is only pure based on the way how we develop tools alone. Like it is not so that we can say that computational science is the most revolutionary aspect of architecture purely alone. The most revolutionary aspect is, of course, what we can do with it. Like what I said about concrete. Concrete was also a revolution in architecture, but in a way concrete existed already for a long time. And of course, it's what you can do with the material. So this phenomenon of how we play with objectivity is where I'm now talking about, and how we then select this aspect of the way how we can mechanize objectivity. So how can we translate things out of nature into a quality whereby we instrumentalize this knowledge out of nature into a spatial or organizational effects. And when it comes down to this mechanical aspect of objectivity, then of course in nature what has been always so interesting is that there is a mechanical system to be found in how snowflakes grow or shrink when it becomes warmer, or when we look at the growth of plants, or the way how, let's say, the development of leaves are developed on plants, are already having a mechanical effect in themselves. So the science of nature is fascinating to look at, but particularly also how we have observed it with, for instance, photography, as you can see here on the right. But in a series of design moments, we can create an architecture. It is also similarly possible to create that phenomenon of the mechanical objectivity in design. It doesn't mean that we have to design all these variants, but we often believe that that is the most interesting. No, if you know your topic, if you know how to generate a particular spatial effect, the most fascinating then is to let the design grow into a development whereby we know where and what is not working within the project. Like in this case, we didn't want to have any column in the central spaces of the exhibition areas in this project. So the circle elements are all in a span of 33 meters, are column free. But that meant that the central part needed to have this twist, as I showed you, in order to hold up these big plateaus on the side, and then of course being held up by the cores in the center of the atrium of this building as well. So that was the research here. There were only 4 or 5 topics we wanted to refine. But if this notion of the trained judgment and the specialist can be thought to read this type of information, oh, I should not look at my phone. Then what is then important is that we know how we can communicate with this information. So this might sound very provocative, because you probably can't read what is actually exactly happening here in this series of plans, but the most important is that you will learn, that you have to learn to read what is actually going in there. So, if I'm talking about a particular phenomenon of the craft of the way how we develop design, then before maybe we did a lot of work by the hand, and we could make all these variations, and we could work with typology, as we know in former times. But later, in the beginning of but just goes into the factory, is similar in price as we cut a straight piece of glass, and we can really prove that now, and also we can argue it. With many other materials we have been treating in different manners. So variation is introduced not so much on the mechanical aspect or on the typological aspect anymore, but in my argument much more connected to this idea of trained judgment. So if we think about how we used to work in design, then maybe the idea was that there was a top-down strategy. The architect comes up with a sketch, and then you go into the process of analyzing the sketch, you make a series of models, and then hopefully then the building will come out of that process. So quite linear. But today what is very fascinating is that we might start with a whole series of special input from different parties who overlap each other's knowledge, as you can see here. So the overlapping of the knowledge is introducing many different parts of the development of the collecting of the knowledge of design, and the engineering, I would like to call it, design, and then slowly turns itself into selecting itself into maybe one goal or one direction. That doesn't mean that the top-down strategy is not there anymore. Of course, there is a guidance, and someone like myself supervises a lot. But it is more or less developed through, how do you call that? A conceptual guidance. Conceptual guidance together with this idea of how you combine it with trained judgment of all the knowledge you gain together. Like it is not anymore this division, there is not any more strong division in the way how we work with different groups. We introduced lately a strategy of not a tandem quality we introduced between the architect and the specialist anymore. What we do is we overlap a system whereby sometimes 4 or 5 specialists can ping pong with each other and develop with each other a fractal series of knowledge, and then it is put into a conclusion towards the process of design. So it's this structural relationship between what you gain as an architect. It's the structural relationship of what you develop in the process instead of going for the object. That's what I'd like to emphasize. It's not so that that the object in itself is key. It's in the way how you select information. Talking about nature, this was one of the inspirations for the latest project we developed in a tower in Paris, where these irregular variations of this wing geometry was picked up for this facade, and the internal organization of this building, but whereby we gained all the different aspects of the sustainable, the engineering of the project, whereby we learned that if you introduce a double glass facade and you would allow that double glass facade to build up a certain amount of heat or warmth, that it would be wasting a lot of energy if you would actually transport it to the inside of the building. So what we learned was through this knowledge, that it was important to compartmentalize the heat into different units over the whole building. And then, of course, with the width of the facade in relationship to its depth and how we then translated it to the height of the building, it was important then to see of what kind of relationship between the different compartments needed to be introduced. And here you see then a first test of how the subdivision of these points and the fields within the facade had to be translated. And also connecting itself towards the internal organization and the optimization of the plan. And we know all this program. I mean, I'm probably, I would say that you would be wrong that some of the architects here in the room would not know this program, but this is, you know that, it is Grasshopper. And with Geary Technologies and Grasshopper and all the different programs we cross-combine with each other. Maybe I should have said it in the beginning, but we learned that combining different programs, that you can be far more optical in the way how you optimize your geometry and the volumes of your project. So and here then the different modules and units came together into the facade. And you see here, I'm not going to explain all the details of the project and how, let's say, the different units and the functions work in this building, but I'd like to show you the process of design and how we came to this almost highly technological facade, what is turned into a spatial effect, but it's quite, we thought, unusual. Combining some of of course, the attainable. I don't like to talk anymore about sustainability because everyone talks about it, but I'd like to talk about the phenomenon of the attainable. And attainable, the word attainable is connected to the idea of how we can make things affordable, not only purely in its energy concept, but also in its material concept, related to the sustainable and the affordable and the sustainable. If you put these two words together, maybe we could call that attainability. But so many active aspects of the attainable can be introduced into our architecture today. It's a knowledge what is so complex, and I try to visualize that in this diagram, where on the one hand we have the materials, on the other hand we have the environment, but particularly what is the most important is how you translate it into material effects and how you compartmentalize it into spatial organization is one of the most interesting things to talk about today. I'll give you another example, and we tested that for now over 5 to 6 buildings. Concrete core activation is one of the most fascinating aspects to introduce in architecture, because if you put all your installations in your concrete, you can often win 30 centimeters over each floor in the building. So you can imagine if you have a building of maybe 70 stories high, you win an enormous amount, almost 30% you could say, of materials in that whole building. And this is what I'm lately discovered, that it is so that these new techniques give you a new kind of concept of control of the way how you design. So this, keep maybe that in mind, that if I talk about trained judgment, then it is about a new concept of how we could control design on both sides, on the like I said, the hard side of architecture and call it the more softer side of architecture. Give you some other examples, like here in this facade we had to deal also with the heat loads in the building, and play with the idea of how, from which corner the sun would come in far more than on the, let's say, more the northern turn of the side. And then we just program. We like, you can maybe still see here a plan, but this is the way how the plan and the facade and the three-dimensionality of the facade is further then tested. And you can see then here how it unfolds itself, and how each piece, although unique, you might say, is not so unique, because it looks like highly fragmented and highly complex, but there's an enormous amount of repetition to be found in here. There are only around 9 elements who are different in this facade. And create then this almost literally this moray effect of the different layers of the structure of this facade. And similarly, these articulations are not to be found only purely in the facade alone. We often start from the inside out, like you can see in this internal aspect of the building, whereby the escalators are just twisted around this core of the vertical part of the building. As you go up, you experience quite nicely the city and the view towards the city, but you also around you, it's almost like if you have a panorama of people who move with you when you are looking at the panorama of the city. And the glass, I forgot to say that the angles of the glass in the facade, they turn with this panorama. So the geometry of the escalators following the geometry also of the panorama of the elements in the facade. And of course, having had that experience with buildings who have to be quite often closed down, we open them up during the night with these effects. Similarly, for instance, in this music theater in Graz, where we talked a bit about music today, where we believed that it was so nice to look also at how in the entrance of the project you would almost experience, maybe before you go into the theater, if you would be able to look at music, that you would experience music. But here also you can see that the articulation of the way how we subdivided and open up the building without any columns, so to create a far more open public effect for not only the students in this building, because this is a music theater for students for the University of Graz, but also for the public, because in the evening the building can be opened up and then there are performances given there, or either professional or sometimes by students who perform for the city of Graz. But as certain acoustic articulations are to be found in the internal theater of, as you can see on the left-hand side, these articulations are also to be found into the three-dimensionality of the space. So where architects often play with this idea of the surface treatment, I believe that is, in my opinion, two-dimensional and even too much one-dimensional. If it is only dealing with one notion, and that is particularly the image of it alone. That's why I often talk about the after-image, but the after-image is also related to the way how the internal structure of the spatial effect is connecting itself from a 3D, even I like to really talk about 4D and 1D effects. So, like I said, that aspect of the internal and the external, they communicate with each other. They generate these different layers of a possible series of programs to be related to then an effect of this space I showed you before. And then exposed during the night also to its surroundings. So, but my conclusion here is that using these techniques of simulation and the way how they generate a particular articulation of a form through evaluation and the serial, like I didn't go into the aspect of the serial in detail, but when I talked about the house with its twist that was transported to the further development of Mercedes, or a project like Graz, similarly in the middle is having that twist that carries almost 3 floors in the construction of the building. This serial aspect is related to, of course, how we layer or architecture. So on the one hand, we could say that the layers are linear. So I mean, I have to be careful here to be critical towards myself, because I mean, it's not so layered as you see here, so linear. So it's not about the conceptual, the circulation, and the way how attainability and the structure come together within the design. But it is, like I said, it's relational. Maybe it would be good to bring that earlier diagram in of how the process of design operates. The key is that this can form a particular series of possibilities to expand one's work, not only through the serial of the build work alone, so that you can reverse engineer back to its design. But also project, like I said, like with the pavilions, we projected a lot of techniques. We test the techniques and then later bring it into the buildings. So lately we talk about networks of knowledge platforms where we work with. So if there are specialists within my group of people, then we talk about innovative organizational qualities of ideas we bring forward related to the idea of smart parameters. I'm not talking about parametric design here, but more how, let's say, how we can be selective with parametric design, or how we can connect it to, for instance, the notion of innovative materials, towards the way how that could be tested in our projects. So, and this is not related to the way how we organize ourselves, particularly there where it is connected towards the people we work with together. So the last aspect I would like to go into, and that is this project. I'm not going to explain the program, etc., but it is that what I said before, that how we gain the knowledge through detailing, rephrasing, the way how we deal with the depth and the height and the different aspects of the articulation of a texture in a facade is key. And we then test these one-to-one, like I maybe didn't show so much in the other project, but you saw that for Graz and you saw it also for Mercedes, is that these one-to-one models become or models for the way how we train ourselves, because they become a way how the objectivity is tested and the subjectivity in the same time, because we sometimes might not like the complexity of the facade, or that it becomes so overdone that we like to calm it down. So that's how we have learned to work with our latest aspect of our work, and dealing with this quality of the judgment is where key concepts can refine itself in such a way that the skill and the interpretation of, you call it the creative assessment, is combined with recognizing a guided experience. So guided experience is the only way how we can develop this technique, simply because if the experience is not there, then it's very difficult to guide. So in this notion of the double shift of the way how we read our architecture, it's not, like I said, it's not so important to only think about architecture as an objective field, but as a field where architecture can produce also another architecture. So this is actually only the introduction to the theme of trained judgment, and I have to elaborate it more and more on it, so I hope to get some reflection from you today. Thank you very much.
I guess that's some questions.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start with one. You said that this notion of trained judgment is very much also related to the question of control of your design. It's almost like like a tool you can play with and incorporate in different aspects of practice. I wonder whether what you think about control actually. Are there moments where you actually lose control, or is it rather about opening up a broad field where you can actually manipulate every little thing? But I'm somehow interested whether there is this other side where there's so many possibilities and there's so many possibilities to make judgments that maybe there's a moment where you would actually almost lose control.
Yeah.
Which is something that an architect would never acknowledge that this is possible. But
no, I even allow, but that's actually that's something what can only come through experience. Like I said at the end, I allow now. Did everyone hear the question? Because it's interesting. You didn't hear the question. So where do you control in trained judgment, and what is the notion of concept of control? Where there maybe you might lose control. You know, what is it that where you give in on control? It's a very nice question, because in a way, you know that, I mean, your first building is all over controlled. Yeah, I mean, every building you do as an architect in the first phases is always controlled on all the levels. You want to make sure that all the details work, that the handles, the rails, the quality of the finishes are all perfect. You want to have a perfect building everywhere, overall there. But what you learn over the time is that, especially if you build in different places, different cultures, is that you have to develop a form of a concept of control. That's why I call it concept of a control, whereby you know where one can handle certain materials better than others. So that is maybe suggesting that that it would be quite nice or interesting to develop a form of control whereby you almost know in the end, well, I have to make sure in this place that the concrete is done better than let's say, for instance, the way how we handle other parts of the materials in the building. Or that, that you select 4 elements. I believe lately in what I call the bigger details of design. So I'm not going, I mean, I don't believe so much anymore that the control over the smaller details is the most important. Of course, the most important is the major, bigger details. So the 3 or 4 elements whereby you design the building with. And I give you maybe an example of a very early project where I tested that because it had to deal with a critical budget, I like to say. A very critical budget. We had 1,300 guilders So that is almost, well, it is 750 euros per square meter for a museum we had to design. And the client was talking about a wooden floor and a beautiful kind of open high ceilings, and all not possible, I argued, because this would be not possible within that budget. So what we did was to go towards, and every architect in the room knows where I'm talking about. So with this client, I went to all the galleries in New York, showing that a gallery doesn't have to look like a museum. Like at most of the galleries in New York, was quite nice that you see everything hanging around. You know, all the installations. I mean, if it is messy on the floor, it doesn't matter. Like here, we like it even. You know, when it's looking like that. So what we did was to design then a gallery-like space for this museum, and we selected 3 elements for the whole project to design well, and it was the staircase. Because the staircase was in a staircase within a staircase. If you would move up the staircase or go down in the staircase, you would go to each program in the building. So you would go to the garderobe, or you would go with a bridge within the staircase, you would go to the cafe, or you would go to the first floor. So that was one. Secondly was the ceiling. This, maybe you notice, it's called the Valkhof Museum. The ceiling is bending with you. And this was just a simple standard ceiling, but we manipulated just by using the strings on different heights. It was a very, very low-key design principle. And then the third element was the facade. So these 3 elements we controlled, but the rest we didn't control. Of course, the family of details, like 7 or 8 major details, like even with that the smaller details, and some of the in-between details, but mainly we tried not to design details. So that's how we learn to develop a form of out-of-control quality you can bring back to the design. So that's what I call reverse engineered design. But you're talking about something else. Sorry that I gave that long answer. You're talking about something else, but I have to introduce it in this manner, because if you don't have that experience of how to control in the final effect of the building, you don't know how to introduce it in your design. So what you're saying is, where do you lose control in the design? And that is also fascinating, because I mean, we often have to learn to fail in design. I'm saying that a lot, especially to the students. You have to learn to be daring in the way how you do your experiments, and then know that you don't have the full control anymore of the design. But that doesn't mean that your design could become undisciplined, because that is my critique towards undisciplined computational design. There is so much computational design going around, and there is so much form. And I lately say there is so much spaghetti that one has to learn to deal with this latest technique in such a way that you know how to discipline it. And that doesn't mean that you then have full control, but that you learn then how to lose control, and that way pull your control back is the most essential. So yeah, to learn to fail and to learn to discover a mistake can become a winner is what often scientists do as well. Often the best scientists, when they are in the laboratoriums, they discover a lot of mistakes, and they have a far more deeper urgency of inventing. Like in medical, I've talked to a lot of medical scientists over the last years, because for particular reasons. And medical scientists have this will to because of the urge of certain facets they have to find. They have the will to experiment more on a higher level of risk-taking. And then they discover that something might be found in that. So yeah, I like making uncontrolled designs, but then I pull it back to a form of control, concept of control after that. Yeah.
I'm thinking about the idea of justification in the process of when you talk about trained judgment.
Yeah.
Is justification part of the process of design, when you have like milestones within the process? When you show this bottom-up process, there are nodes where you could take a certain kind of judgment during the process which would steer the design in a different pattern than in another form. does justification play a role in that? And is also, like when you develop the system, you have a certain hierarchy of rules that play within the system and also constraints. So how does this, like it's not just a linear line, but it's interconnected like a web?
Yeah, well, yeah, justification of the and selection of choices is related often to the concept what is not always clear in the beginning. Maybe there is a vague concept of what we like to develop, you know, like there might be a statement to be said of, well, would it not be interesting to work with the idea of the trifold, for instance, in Mercedes? I mean, is that a mathematical model we have tested? No, we have not tested it. So before we had only the Möbius structure or the Seifert surfaces in mathematical models we have tested. But what happened in the experiment is that when we tried to step down with the three platforms of exhibition spaces, what we discovered that that spatially it would not work, that if it would have only one path. And originally in the brief, there was asked to introduce two types of exhibition space, but we didn't have the two paths in the beginning of the process of design. We only discovered that later, that could be possible. There was only a possibility there of two types of exhibition spaces. So you would move from a more indoor exhibition space to a more outdoor viewing exhibition space. So that was so what I'm trying to say is that we allow, and it's a similar kind of question in a way, we allow a certain form of evolutionary conceptual development in the design process. So that is, and even I would like to say, that's why I'm saying a relational quality of a concept development quality in the design process. Yeah, so what I'm trying to say with that is that it is not object-oriented. That's not so that I have in my mind the building needs to look like that anymore. Maybe there is something of an image, a vague image what I might have, but I'd like to leave the process open, as was asked, in order to discover, even through failing. That we discover and fail and discover and fail, and then maybe it might then suddenly work. And that, I said it in the beginning, for me the project is there interesting where it works. So if it works, then it's aesthetically right. Or aesthetic, I should be careful with the word aesthetically, but it works. You know, maybe translate the word for aesthetics into that what, you know, what you, for the word works, how it works. More questions? No computer questions?
I never have computer questions, so I can't use it basically. But I think you mentioned in the beginning something when you talked about facades and double views or double images, where you mentioned the notion of the parallax view. And I was thinking, of course, also, whenever I hear this notion, I think about the movie with affordability.
Yeah.
Which I think is somewhat interesting, maybe aspect in this discussion, because it's a movie that is, of course, totally aesthetic, and it's about politics and imagery. It's really amazing, but it's mainly about conspiracy. So I wonder a bit, or it's more speculation, whether this discipline of the architect and also what the kind of potentials that you showed to us, I think it talks both about kind of incredible freedom to do things and experiment, but it also shows us amazing possibilities of manipulation and conspiracy, like controlling people. I think this is, to me, something that's fascinating about this profession, actually.
Nice. No, I like the word conspiracy, because, you know, we had remember that time. We had a period, so 10 years ago, where we lost our control over architecture. We were actually asked to design only facades. You know, often the building was already designed by the co-architect of the client, and they said, "No, look, I mean, we have this is fully tested. This is a right plan for the office building we want you to design." And how do you mean me to design? But then the building was already designed for most of the, aspects by its plan. I have had many clients on that level, and then you could do a nice facade that, and do only the preliminary part of the design, because we have another architect who can then translate it in details. And we all know about that phase.